Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
In Mosul, Iraq, an attempt to assassinate a Sunni leader claimed the lives of 7 people and wounded 3 others. The Al-Zarqawi group is warning Iraqis not to join the police or the army. Meanwhile, controversy surrounds the assassination of mosque leaders and imams. Gunmen are escalating their attacks against Iraqi officials. Suicide attacks are on the rise, killing and wounding many. Roadside bombs and other attacks occurred in Tikrit, Samarra, Mosul, and Baghdad.
We found 4 bodies in southern Tikrit and sent the bodies to the city's hospital.
But recent attacks are of special concern, fearing that Iraq may be headed in the direction of massive sectarian strife. The decisive action will be decided tomorrow after Friday prayers. Iraqi Sunnis decided to stop praying at the mosque all over Iraq, following a decision by the agencies representing them. They will close all the mosques for 3 days in protest over what they call an organized killing spree by the Shiite movement, the Dar, which is part of the Supreme Islamic Council in Iraq. The tension in Baghdad and other central Iraqi cities inhabited by Shiites and Sunnis has led the religious associations of the 2 sects to take tight security measures, sending armed men to defend the mosques, its leaders, and its imams. The decision escalated the situation to a boiling point, especially after a number of Iraqi National Assembly members threatened to question Sheikh Hareth al-Dari, the director of the Islamic Scholars Association, about the accusations he made against the armed men of the Badr movement, saying they are waging assassination operations against Sunnis. These allegations are the first of its kind. The situation is becoming more complex as the leader of al-Qaeda's cell in Iraq, Jordanian Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, has entered this conflict, accusing the Shiites of being American agents and cast-offs. In addition, he threatened to kill every Sunni who helps draft Iraq's new constitution and justified the murder of Iraqis. In an audio tape broadcast on the internet, Zarqawi justified the suicide attacks in Iraq, where civilians fall victim, saying that fighting the bigger harm has priority over avoiding smaller ones.
Following a meeting at the White House, Egyptian Prime Minister Ahmed Nazif confirmed that President George Bush urged him to continue on the path of democracy and political reform. Nazif stated that President Bush congratulated Egypt for its economic development. Nazif's visit to the U.S. is considered the first official visit of an Egyptian prime minister to Washington. Former Egyptian prime ministers had visited the American capital only as official dignitaries, along with President Hosni Mubarak.
The meeting behind closed doors in the White House between President Bush and the Egyptian Prime Minister Nazif lasted less than half an hour. Nazif exited alone after exhausting efforts to hammer out the issues and controversy surrounding the U.S. demands for sending international observers to monitor the Egyptian presidential election.
We did not discuss the issue of international observers. However, we talked about the importance of having legitimate election that is free of manipulation and foul play. Nowadays, with satellite technology, the entire world will be an observer.
Observing the Egyptian election via satellite did not seem convincing to the U.S., as expressed by the White House spokesman, who stressed the importance of providing guarantees that the Egyptian election will be free and democratic. The U.S. administration refused to comment on the newly adopted amendments regarding elections which were recently added to the Egyptian charter to improve the voting system. Political reforms in Egypt were the center of discussion between Nazif and the senior American officials. The meeting took place at the Egyptian ambassador's house, which made it less formal and more inviting. Both parties tried to give the impression that the American-Egyptian relations are not as bad as has been implicated by the media. Tension has been rising between the two countries, which can be evidenced by the absence of the Egyptian president Mubarak, who usually comes personally to such meetings. Mubarak did not attend to avoid criticism and the pressure of being directly asked to adopt political reforms in Egypt. In an interview with Abu Dhabi TV, the Egyptian Prime Minister denied that the U.S. has pressured or is pressuring his country regarding reforms.
There has not been any American pressure on the Egyptian administration. Indeed, the U.S. administration has welcomed the new reforms adopted by President Mubarak and the Egyptian government. There were some recommendations concerning the importance of making political reforms transparent to the world. President Mubarak and all of us would like to see true reforms for Egypt's sake. Egypt can become a model of political reform for the entire Middle East region.
Regardless of the political pressure that Washington is exerting on Cairo, political observers believe that the relations between the two countries are increasingly becoming based on interests rather than affection.
I think the relations are becoming rockier, and the Egyptian government is less enthusiastic now to help the American administration in regional plans and initiatives that may not primarily serve the Egyptians' interests. Their bilateral relationship is going through a stage where each country looks after its own interests first.
Far from diplomacy, and despite reassurances that were given by the U.S. to the Egyptian Prime Minister confirming their strategic alliance, the message received by Dr. Nazif was rather clear. Egypt must adhere to reforms that will set a democratic model for the Middle East, and all the reforms that have been done so far by Egypt are only the beginning of a series of important reforms that Washington is waiting for.
Hariri reiterated the importance of national unity. Hariri met this morning with Armenian Catholic Patriarch Nerses Bedros XIX in Beirut and stressed on the need for open dialogue among all Lebanese. He later met with the Syrian Catholic Patriarch Ignatios Boutros XVIII and said dialogue and national unity are Lebanon's pillars. Officials said an election list led by Saad Hariri, son of slain former Prime Minister Rafik al-Hariri, has already won 9 of 19 parliament seats up for grabs in Beirut without a vote being cast. A spat of candidate withdrawals this week means that 9 candidates of Saad al-Hariri's ticket have won seats by default a full 11 days before the capital vote on May 29th. Some 400,000 people are eligible to vote in Beirut, where the first round of Lebanon's face polls for seats in the 128-member parliament will take place. Beirut was the political bastion of Rafik Hariri, a Sunni billionaire businessman assassinated on February 14th. The electoral victories result from the fact that candidates who had registered for the May 29th first phase of general elections withdrew or had no opponents, effectively giving the seats to the list headed by Saad Hariri. Tomorrow is the deadline for withdrawals. Among those automatically elected are Solange Toutounji, the widow of Bashir Gemayel, who was assassinated shortly after being elected president in 1982. Gemayel's widow was guaranteed the seat after sitting MP Ghattas Khouri, a member of Rafik Hariri's bloc, withdrew from the race to allow her to join the list of his son. Khouri said he withdrew to preserve unity within opposition ranks and to help Saad Hariri preserve the unity of Beirut. The third Maronite candidate, banker Georges Tian, also withdrew, leaving Gemayel without any rival for the seat. 2 other Hariri bloc candidates, Shiite Ghazi Youssef and Druze Ghazi Aridi, were also the only candidates for their respective seats. Candidates may withdraw because, not having been chosen by one of the major political lists, they have virtually no chance of being elected and would prefer to recover their hefty filing fees. Others pull out after deciding that they have no hope of being elected as independents. In Kreitem, Saad Hariri called the Beirut's residents to vote against those who killed his father. Hariri said those were the ones trying to build obstacles in the rebuilding of Beirut and national unity. Hariri reiterated relations between his family and Walid Jumblat was very deep. For his part, the head of the Progressive Socialist Party, MP Jumblat, stressed the importance of preserving the 1989 Taif Accord and Lebanon's Arab identity. The Beirut International Airport is to be named after late former Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. It was the latest cabinet decision made in its meeting yesterday. But contrary to expectations, the cabinet, presided over by Prime Minister Najib Mikati, postponed the appointment of 2 security chiefs until next week. 5 security chiefs have been dismissed so far, leaving only President Emil Lahoud's Presidential Guard's chief, a close figure to the staunchly pro-Syrian head of state. But Lahoud and his son-in-law, Defense Minister Ilyas Mour, are insisting that Muslim Shiite General Security Chief Jamil Sayed be replaced by a Christian Maronite, triggering an immediate rejection from Muslim members of cabinet, including Mikati, who insisted if a change its sect is to implement it should be included all. It is to hold 3 sessions next week, starting Wednesday, to discuss matters related to Lebanon's electricity. Mikati briefed the cabinet on his visits to Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and the United Nations in New York. Interior Minister Hassan Saba denied any disagreement between the ministers over the appointments of security chiefs. Leading opposition figure General Michel Aoun slammed the opposition as seasonal and urges members to pay solidarity calls to Samir Jaja. After visiting his wartime foe at the Rumia prison yesterday, Aoun called for Jaja's release in a bid to advance reconciliations. Following the meeting, Aoun slammed Jaja's continued detention as unjust, saying he was condemned by a court which was not free but under Syrian control. General Michel Aoun, who ended 15 years of exile on May 7th, told reporters yesterday in Rabia Samir Jaja, leader of the defunct Christian Lebanese forces, should be released from prison, but also acquitted because he was jailed on the basis of an accusation for which he was found not guilty. Jaja was found innocent of a 1994 bomb attack on a church, which killed 11 people. Unlike other former warlords, was handed a death sentence that was commuted to life imprisonment for crimes committed during the war. He can only be pardoned by a vote in parliament or by Lebanon's president. Jaja was convicted of the 1987 assassination of Prime Minister Rashid Karame, whose brother Omar Karame, another ex-premier, is opposed to amnesty calls for the former LF chief. Jaja was also accused of masterminding the killing of politician Dani Shamoun and his family in 1990. But Dori Shamoun accused Syria for his brother's murder. Aoun urged opposition leaders such as Saad Hariri and Walid Jumblat to also pay solidarity calls on Jaja, whom he found in very good health. The army general said the meeting turned into a reconciliation to turn the page on the past. Aoun's soldiers fought fierce battles with Jaja's forces for control of the Christian heartland north of Beirut in 1988 and 1989. In an interview with AFP, Aoun criticized fellow opposition leaders for bowing to the government's terms for elections this month. Aoun said that this so-called opposition was only seasonal. Its representatives were in power during the period when Syria dominated Lebanese politics. Aoun said the opposition was falling apart in the run-up to phased elections, which are due to start on May 29th. He charged that it has failed to draw up a common platform to contest the polls, to be held over 4 consecutive Sundays until June 19th. He said the parliamentary elections would be flawed due to legal falsification, accusing Jumblat and Hariri, officially his allies, of having bowed to international pressure to accept the polls under whatever conditions. Aoun stressed democratic life cannot start with an unhealthy law. Christians have charged that the 2000 electoral law is unfair because it allows only 15 Christian MPs to be elected by Christian voters, while 49 others would be elected by Muslims, and is therefore not representative of their community. Parliament has an equal number of seats reserved for Christian and Muslims. Aoun said other opposition members had agreed, quote, to self-destruction and destroy the hope for change, but he did not close the door on cooperation and said he was ready to try to draw up a common program up until the last minute. The general reiterated the priority is to hold fair elections and not the date. But he said, even if the Syrians have gone, their methods remain.
According to Palestinian sources, the Israeli occupation authorities dumped and buried 80 tons of toxic waste in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, especially in cities with a high population density, such as Nablus, Hebron, and Gaza. This has a negative impact on the environment, and radiation seeps to underground water resources.
This is the reality. There's nothing stopping the Israelis from turning the areas where Palestinians live into hell on earth. The issue of Israeli toxic waste was brought up recently, shedding light on the inhumane practices against the Palestinian people.
Because this is an Arab area, no one seems to care. This is really harmful, and the smell is really harmful to the city.
A number of large Palestinian cities are faced with the threat of radiation caused by this waste, and Nablus is one of these cities. The residents of this town on the outskirts of Nablus confirm that the waste Israel discarded on their city threatens their mere existence.
Diseases such as parasites, cancer, and a number of other cases have been reported. This is harmful to us and the surrounding areas. It is not just a local issue. It affects the entire area.
One cannot see radioactive material in this pile of garbage, but in some areas, such as the village of Utah, near Hebron, there is a real threat of extermination as dozens of cancer cases have been reported, especially among children. The residents of these Palestinian areas say they are unable to conduct tests to determine whether or not it's nuclear waste, and have asked international agencies to test for radioactive material.
The city council does not have the budget to conduct such tests, but we presented a request to the national authority and they conducted a number of tests.
The Israeli occupation authorities taking advantage of the city districts, treating Zone C as if it were its own, doing with it as they wish. Experts confirm without a doubt that the waste in these areas is industrial radioactive waste.
I visited the sites. There are massive piles of garbage. It is very strange. I've never seen such waste, and it appears to be industrial waste.
They're talking about the creation of a Palestinian state. However, the main concern is dealing with the aftermath of the occupation. They pursue you everywhere, and their justification is that you are Palestinian. What is happening here is a blatant example of how the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory harms not only people, but the trees and land as well. Faris Sarafanidi, Al-Alam, reporting from the Dur Sharaf village near the city of Nablus, occupied Palestine.
Staying in Iraq, the city of Qom near the Syrian border has been a ghost town since the US offensive against rebels began. Yesterday, a fraction of the population returned to the city to inspect the damage done to their homes. For nearly a week, the Iraqi town of Qom was a battleground. It was the center of Operation Matador, one of the largest US campaigns since militants were driven out of their Fallujah stronghold in November. The streets are littered with grim souvenirs of the fighting that raged in the town and the surrounding villages. The burnt-out hulk of a US armored vehicle is now a playframe for local children. Residents of the city said even mosques did not escape damage.
This is a mosque. They destroyed the mosque and took all the people who were inside with them. Why? Don't they feel afraid of God?
Others said there were no fighters in the city, painting a terrifying picture of the bombing.
The bombing was indiscriminate. The bombing was barbaric.
Now, with the conclusion of Operation Matador, Qom's shell-shocked residents are trickling back to their battle-scarred streets. They're trying to survey the extensive damage wrought, and they want to tend to their wounded. The US military declared the major offensive against followers of Iraq's most wanted insurgent, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, officially over on Saturday. When they pulled out, they left bullet-pocked homes, roads gouged out by shells, and at least one flattened mosque. The US military estimates 125 insurgents were killed in the fighting and says significant caches of weapons were seized in the operation. 9 Marines were also killed in the battle and 40 soldiers were wounded. But the civilian death toll remains uncounted. The psychological and emotional toll on the inhabitants of Qom remains immeasurable. And while the US declared Operation Matador a victory, it appears to have had little impact on the wider insurgency that has brought new levels of extreme violence to Iraq.
Nobel laureates, some of the world's greatest minds, have wrapped up a two-day conference in the ancient city of Petra. They agreed to hold regular meetings in Petra. The conference, dubbed A World in Danger, has tackled a wide range of issues including world peace, economic and social development, health and education, in addition to the troubles facing Iraq and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. With the attendance of His Majesty the King, the conference called for strengthening democratic institutions and fostering economic development to address inequity and injustice, which are the root causes of terrorism. The final session issued recommendations dealing with issues threatening the world.
Reach solutions, no, indications only. And there are indications about peace and security, about enhancing peace and promoting individual strategies, corporate strategies, especially education, to engage the private sector, to recognize and expand the essential role of civil society in creating conditions for conflict resolution and prevention, to encourage really every one of us to become vehicles of compassion, to bring about a better world. In economic development, to promote good governance, to clear policies, accountability, to ensure official development assistance, to enhance capital access through microfinance initiatives, to empower women so they can fully participate in economic development activities, to match curriculum, to encourage developed countries, in general, simply to abolish the plague of misery.
The conference stressed the seriousness of problems facing the world and agreed that no nation alone could work out solutions. Former U.S. President Bill Clinton stressed cooperation among world institutions to ward off this scourge of terrorism and dangers posed to the entire world by global warming. He called for proper use of resources for a better future and an end to global conflicts.
We have sequenced the human genome, we have put a space station in the sky, we have discovered billions of galaxies in the universe that may, for all we know, have life that we cannot even imagine. But the Palestinians still don't have a home in the West Bank. There are still over 5 million people who are at death's door with AIDS, who don't have medicine that's universally available in the wealthy countries. We're burning up the planet at a record rate. We're doing lots of good and lots of harm. On balance, I am optimistic, but I'm also cautionary. And I want to end my remarks on a promising note that shows how simple I think it would be for us to do the right thing if we could drop a lot of our baggage and think of our children, our grandchildren, and the simple humanity behind whatever policy. And I've gotten to the point where whenever anybody asks me about any issue, I look through the prism, a simple prism. I say, which course of action will build a world, a country, a community in which there are more shared responsibilities, more shared benefits, and a more perfect projection of the shared value of our common humanity.
Also among participants in the Petra conference was U.S. actor Richard Gere, who spoke to our reporter Iman Lakour.
I think it's very moving that it all happened here in Jordan right now. You have a young, very smart, energetic, committed king and that you would be starting this kind of international conference, bringing people here, bringing the modern world here, but honoring the past at the same time. And I think that's what this group was doing. It's people from so many different disciplines and so many points of view. As I keep saying to everyone, no one does everything well. And this is a group of people who does one thing very well. Together we can possibly do some extraordinary things. Not just this group, but if we start to include everyone in this, whatever little thing they can do to be part of a movement to make this the world that we want our children to live in, we want our grandchildren to live in, the legacy we want to leave behind. And it begins with something like this, you know. I think it's quite wonderful for the people of Jordan to feel the pride of being part of something like this and part of a movement that is going to possibly change the future. It can be, I think it's exhilarating for the youth of Jordan to be part of that, but also for the older people to think that this is a legacy that they can leave behind.
And at the end of the two-day conference, the participants and other guests visited the ancient city of Petra and took a tour in the Red City, accompanied by tour guides who spoke about the history of the Nabateans who built the unique city. Uzbek forces have retaken control of the eastern border town of Kurasu, scene of unrest in the aftermath of bloody clashes in nearby Andijan. Local people crossing a river bridge into Kyrgyzstan said troops were hunting anybody in the town who may have been connected to the May 13 violence in Andijan and later disturbances in Kurasu. The town remained closed to journalists trying to enter from Kyrgyzstan, and there was no clear picture of what was going on there. Local journalists on the Kyrgyz side said 2 opposition figures in the town had been arrested. The violence in the Central Asian state has led to expressions of concern from the West and the United States, which regard the country as an ally in the war on terrorism. The Uzbek government says 169 people were killed in the Andijan violence, most of them militants. Witnesses said some 500 had died in fighters' violence alone.
Iranian Foreign Minister Kamal Kharrazi, who is on a 3-day state visit to Iraq, met with Iraqi President Jalal Talabani late on Wednesday when he underscored formation of the Iraqi government as a major achievement for Iraqis. The Iranian top diplomat also said Tehran is ready to fully cooperate with Baghdad in the campaign on terrorism. The Iraqi president, for his part, said his country attaches great significance to promotion of ties with Iran, adding Tehran has always been a good friend for the Iraqi nation, especially in hardships. This comes as Tehran and Baghdad vow to bring to life the already signed agreements. Kharrazi, holding second round of negotiations with his Iraqi counterpart Hoshar Zebari on Wednesday, called for identification of significant priorities such as the resumption of pilgrimage cooperation and releasing Iranian prisoners detained in Iraq. He also called for a timetable for a high joint commission. Zebari, in turn, said Baghdad is interested in boosting relations with Tehran. Iraqi top diplomat went on to say negative viewpoints by some Iraqi officials in the past are not reflecting the stance taken by Iraqi government on Iran. Meanwhile, in the day, the Iranian Foreign Minister held talks with Chairman of the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq, Abdul Aziz Hakim, as well as Adel Abdul Mahdi, a member of the Iraqi Presidential Council.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.